All right. So as we get into this, this is just a little bit about my background and path. I think it's really important for us to all kind of share a little bit of our perspective and where we're coming from. We'll get into this more today. But in my early undergraduate and early graduate training, I was lucky enough to get to do both prevention and implementation science for substance use, and especially for family-based substance use prevention programs. So a lot of this was kind of on updating evidence-based programs, doing some fidelity tracking, and doing a lot of research and collaborative work. And some of the primary focus within this was all on psychedelics or on substance use, with some of it in collaborative work in psychedelics, and the primary substances being alcohol, cannabis, and opioids. Later on in my graduate training, I was able to do some clinical work, so mostly working in community mental health settings and in university counseling settings. So within that, I kind of had a specialty of comorbid treatment of depression and substance use, which while those two disorders are fairly common, kind of understanding the overlap is really beneficial for best care. And as I continue to do this work, I felt really excited and curious about understanding how all aspects of health can blend together. So I was able to do some collaborative research on a team of kinesiologists and psychologists and do some cool research around, weightlifting to manage depression, even things like cycling prior to a therapy session to see if that physical activity right before therapy would almost activate or prime people for the therapeutic experience. Unfortunately, the study didn't work, but we learned quite a bit throughout the path. And now my work is really integrated relational work within prevention and intervention. So this can be anything from understanding people's backgrounds within their larger systems to eco-psychology, grief work, substance use, and general behavioral health change. In our agenda today, we will go through these four primary topics, one of them being the importance of time, defining your audience, assessing your current messaging, and then using substance use trends across the seasons to inform prevention messaging. So first, starting with the importance of time, I think this is something that we all know intuitively and logistically, and there's many different ways to measure time. But if we're kind of defining time and compartmentalizing that to just 1 year, one common way to do that is the business year or academic year. So each quarter is kind of associated with its own different tasks and needs, and even the cadence of the work week. So oftentimes quarter four can be a lot slower. There's holidays, and this can be a more balanced time for work and life. Whereas, quarter two and three might be kind of like creating, brainstorming, really putting a lot of stuff out in a way where it's kind of preparing for the next season. There's also the environmental year. So this environmental year is shifting each and every year, especially with differences in rainfall or sometimes seeing hotter temperatures in the summer. I'm coming to you all from Denver, Colorado, but I spent the first 27 years of life in Iowa, and yeah, the humidity and corn sweat is no joke right now. So this environmental year can really inform anything from how we spend our free time, how we
Mhm.
vacation, and yeah, when we plant things, harvest things, and yeah, just take in the beauty of the natural world. Similarly, but a little bit different, this is kind of where we as professionals and beings meet the beings of the natural world, so the plants and animals. So the planting year and the creating year can really change throughout the seasons. So when I was in Iowa, I was lucky enough to be pretty involved in Mustard Seed Community Farm. And this is a farm that is fully volunteer run. And it's a really beautiful model where people can go volunteer and then go home with a box of veggies after their volunteer shift. So being in this place, I really kind of learned, some of the specificities that each like plant or system requires to thrive. So something such as kale, is sowed and transplanted outdoors in March to early May, and then can be harvested for a longer period, so June through September. Whereas on the opposite hand, kohlrabi, another one of my favorite vegetables, is one of the more spring planting vegetables and then has just a short window of harvest time in June. So while we're talking about plants here, I also want you to translate that and think about some of that in relation to the physical work that you're doing or sort of the specific finite tasks that have, shorter turnarounds or shorter creation times, in addition to these longer term, high level tasks that you're doing to work with your communities. And then similarly here, I put a similar life cycle with fiber arts. So, sheep to processing to designing, which was another thing that we got to do on the farm. All right. So as we've continued to talk about time, we're now going to transition into defining your audience. And just a quick check-in on the chat. Um, yeah, any thoughts that people have initially about their audience? What are, kind of the primary folks that you're working with, and how do you feel like this informs how you show up? So enter your response to that as you'd like to, but no pressure. So next, looking at the makeup of the Mid-America PTTC, this is you all. 39 people out of 146 that did the needs assessment of last year are coming from community-based organizations. And this was the most frequently reported number. So quite a few of you are working directly with communities and potentially with multiple stakeholders and have many different competing demands within your work. Also thinking about your primary substances that you all are working with, 86% of people said they primarily work with alcohol prevention, 79% of people are working with cannabis prevention, and then 78.8% are working with opioid prevention. And if we're looking to about our own positionality and kind of our career trajectory, the most frequently reported number of professionals that are in the Mid-America PTC are coming in with more than 10 years of experience. That's 48 people. And then 28 people was the second most reported number who have 3 to 5 experience. So anywhere from like early career to mid-career is kind of the range we're going for, or the range, like the makeup of all of us. And then thinking too about our areas of specialty, it was wide and across the way that prevention is the most frequently reported number. So that was 135 people, or 93% of people that are in prevention. And then a smattering of people are in recovery or treatment. So roughly 20% in both and 11% in other. And I highlight this to recognize one, that prevention and treatment are kind of on the continuum of care. And in some ways, prevention I find can be more challenging because you have to make a case or, uh, really kind of build a story around something that has yet to happen, even though we know that there's a high potential for it to happen or past evidence says that it's likely to happen again. There's also the kind of older saying or common phrase that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I really do see this oftentimes in this work and applaud the work that you're all doing and recognize that sometimes that prevention work can be challenging to then measure the outcomes and say, well, we stopped this thing from happening. And like, here's how. Additionally, folks, you all that are working within the Mid-America PTTC, roughly 80% of you are working with people from rural communities. Roughly 80% of you are working with people with low-income backgrounds or experiencing poverty. And then 67% are working with racial and ethnic minority groups. And roughly 30% of you all are working with people with chronic diseases. So again, as we are going through our conversation today, I want you to just kind of recognize which of these um, kind of stats and backgrounds feel fitting for you and align with your work. And then we can use that to create something beautiful together based on your community and, um, yeah, your larger system you're working in. All right. So, getting into defining our audience, this question of what communities am I primarily working with is one that uh, can kind of have some obvious answers or is even embedded into grants initially. You know, we have to define our populations, we have to define our communities. And sometimes there can be additional people that are connected to that sphere. So, for example, if we're working with youth, we then are also inherently working with parents or adults. And how do we then meet youth where we're at and logistically create something that is streamlined for parents or is integrated into settings that youth are already in, whether this is school, faith organizations, after school programs, things of that sort. I also think it's really valuable to take a step back before we kind of create anything and ask what work has already been done. There is yeah, so much historical knowledge that we all can learn from and mistakes that we can prevent ourselves, or problems that have already been strategized and tweaked, and we can then just continue to adapt on this. In some ways, I think this is part of what was so challenging about, you know, the pandemic even, is that all of us alive, or many of us alive, had not experienced that situation. So it was kind of this reshifting on multiple levels. And if we can look at, you know, what work has been done even in the recent past, or even learning from, you know, people who have lived in that community, that can be really valuable to create something that is not only impactful, but is something that people want. This is a little bit of my therapeutic side coming through, but I welcome her in today. But I also really ask us to think about what perspectives you all are bringing to this work. So, how does your perspective inform the questions you ask? How does it inform the work that you prioritize? And how does it inform, you know, your relationships with your colleagues and with the communities you work with? And as you kind of reflect on those questions, you know, I ask to give some compassion, give some grace to parts of yourself that you feel like, maybe I'm not doing this quite in the way I'd like to, and really just get curious of like, where does that come from? In the opposite vein, you have many great strengths that you bring to this work, and I'm sure your communities are really lucky to get to have you. So if there are things that kind of come to mind initially as your strengths and as your primary gifts that you can give to those, get creative and think about how you can continue to deepen those, because that will be fruitful for years to come. And then finally, everything is relational. We bring a perspective, our communities bring a perspective. People's priorities can shift over time, and that can shift personnel, especially in community-based work, fairly often. So just do a quick reflection on what perspectives the community is holding and see if there is, you know, any kind of inklings about are there ways that you two are disconnected and maybe can re-understand each other in a different way. All right. And here is just a visualization of what we shared earlier. So, yeah, 39 people are in those community-based organizations, 11 are in public health as the least frequently cited. And yeah, a lot of you are in either like government university settings or in substance use prevention centers as well. So there might already be natural pairings either with local hospitals or with other funding sources, depending on where you're primarily housed. All right. Moving on to the next area, assessing our current messaging. As we think about current messaging, there's a couple kind of primary things I want us to focus on. The first one is depth of messaging. And again, this is a little bit of just that reflection question of looking already at our messaging and how detailed it is. So, again, as people would like to use the chat, I'm curious if there is a level of messaging that you find yourself preferring to write. Do you prefer to write more like uh, super in-depth, grant proposals that then your team takes away and goes with? Or do you prefer more community-facing messaging? Like, what type of writing and creativity do you like yourself? Awesome. Yeah, Emma said community messaging. And feel free to unmute too if you'd like. Yeah, social media. Awesome. So, yeah, I see a few people, at least people who've shared in the chat, um, do prefer some of the more community-oriented messaging. So, uh, yeah, you're in the right place for this. And as we write that community messaging, um, another question that I think can be beneficial to ask is how you want individuals to engage with it. So, is the purpose of what you're doing to create some cursory, like highlight visibility of your own organization? Is it to give people a call to action and to do something themselves? Do you want to highlight scientific information or something entirely different? I also think within this, as we create this messaging, there are needs that come into play either from our larger grant organizations or for the audiences they're reaching. So kind of keep that in mind, and we'll come back to that later. But as we think about depth of messaging, I think one recent example of this that's fairly fitting is the National Park Service. So I don't know if you all saw these memes, but the National Park Service would take pictures of something within the park and then just kind of make a meme out of it. So Mount Rainier said, I'm not really into drama, but then posted a picture of this marmot that was, kind of like intrigued to hear what the drama was. So, this in itself is not really sharing anything about, um, how to register for a national parks pass or um, best sites to see within Mount Rainier. It truly is just kind of a visibility reminder and something that's kind of funny and entertaining. And sometimes these like hooks can be beneficial to then later share key information. A local example of this is Iowa State Police Department. They will oftentimes make memes or, kind of share jokes with on their page. And in talking to the police officers in their department, that has been intentional. So then, if there is a public emergency, then they're able to reach as many people as possible. Another example of this, I don't know if you all have recently seen the new Wears Prada, but Anne Hathaway's character is asking for feedback on something, and Stanley Tucci says, "Well, do you want feedback or do you want validation or do you want both?" And there's kind of this question of like motivation. What are you searching for in here? So thinking about that own motivation for yourself as well can be really beneficial to purposely create something that people will engage with in the way that you want it to. All right, moving on to adaptation. This is maybe one of my favorite parts of current messaging because I think it can be kind of a fun skill for all of us to learn, especially those with scientific backgrounds. So, again, initial reflection questions. How might this messaging be adapted for different audiences? Uh, and how is some of that core messaging still staying the same? And one kind of funny example of this is this dance. It's called the Aroostook dance. I don't know if anybody has heard of it, if I raise a hands or in the chat. But it is a song that's often used at summer camps, kind of as like a silly campfire song. And this Aroostook dance was something that when I was a camp counselor back in, 2017 at this point, it was, kind of a way for us to get some wiggles out for the kids, get them ready for bed and have some laughs and just kind of end the night at a campfire. And as we were just like going through our summer, we had a local nursing home reach out to us and they wanted us to make a video of it so then they could use it for chair movement for their for people who are living in the nursing facilities. So I just thought that this was like very creative, fun. Not only was it movement for them, but it also, I'm sure was laughs and brevity and a way for all of us to just kind of connect using our bodies and yeah, having some shared giggles together. Another example of this, and one that I would really highlight, is this question of can you talk about your topic to audiences 7 to 70? So this is a picture of my colleague, Dr. Song. She is a soil scientist, and her and I created a collaborative class at Iowa State together where we talked about both soil health and mental health amidst environmental changes. And she had this activity through this in partnership with Reman Gardens where people could take clay and sand and silt and mix it all together and create different soil makeups. And this is, very engaging for younger kids. And she had these, diagrams that kind of explain and really break apart the um, the science of what's going on here. So even thinking about your messaging, maybe there is an interactive component that is geared towards one group of people, and maybe there are written components that are geared towards another group of people. And using both and kind of weaving both together can be really beneficial to create like an overall quality product. So I do want to do a quick activity check-in. So we'll just take maybe 5 minutes here. And again, feel free to use the chat or unmute as you would like to. But I want you to write a few sentences to describe what your office does to a 10-year-old, an acquaintance at a dinner party, and your grandmother or grandfather. And you don't have to share every sentence, but if there's one sentence that you feel like, oh, I really like this, then yeah, I really welcome sharing it. So, yeah, some that we have in the chat already are we help empower students to make good choices. We provide a safe place for fun and engaging activities for young and elderly alike. I love that, Denise. Yeah, my team works to create healthy communities by partnering with community members and organizations to provide resources, community events, and education to students and parents. Awesome. Yeah, I like yours too, Hillary. We provide education to give them resources to make healthy choices. Awesome. Yeah, I'm hearing the word help a lot or healthy choices, education. Nice. Yeah, and even thinking about words such as, um, substance use disorders or norming or, um, yeah, what else? Prevention, like even these words that we use every day, they might kind of be like other people not within this world might kind of pause for a second and be like, oh, what is that? So, yeah, I think these are really great. And uh, when we did this activity within a science communication fellowship, I did at one point somebody added like the extra rule of like you can't have a word longer than 10 letters. And it's like, oh, that's super hard. So, um, yeah, Lisa asked, what is norming? Norming can be anything from like substance use norms within a peer group could be like if one group of peers is drinking quite a bit, then they might see that as the norm or the average, when really that might not be like they might be drinking alcohol in a way that's higher risk, or above average. Yes, of course. Yeah, provide education on medications that are mixed with other medications and makes them harmful. Awesome job, Maria. Lovely. And then for folks who are in AIMS, or who are connected to uh, universities in some way, I really do encourage you to look into a science communication fellowship if possible. Riemann Gardens has a really great one, and I feel like this is a place that I just learned a lot. So, yeah, if you're interested in continued learning, something to check out. All right. And now moving on to the last part of messaging is purpose. So this is one that can be a little tricky and can really take good consultation and problem solving. So does this messaging need to follow local needs, evidence-based practices, or both? So, in general, if you do have to make a decision, it's better to prioritize funding agency requirements and to prioritize the branding and communication guidelines from those larger entities. That does follow best practice within prevention messaging and kind of creates a cohesive uh, yeah, a cohesive brand or a cohesive way to recognize that, like, okay, this agency in Kansas works with these people. And it's kind of that like visual recognition. And if, yeah, when in doubt, follow both, but prioritize the evidence-based practices. And I think following both too can really kind of show itself as we reflect on those earlier questions of like what perspective we're bringing to the work and the work of the community that's already been done. This is also a place where Google Scholar can really be your friend. So, uh, looking at other similar um, projects and seeing kind of how they went from inception to implementation to follow up, there can be a lot that can be learned just in taking some glances at that. And yeah, no, in my past work, this has really been the area that's helped me clarify the most. So even thinking about like cadence of a project, it maybe will take more time to set it up initially, but then because of all that initial work and thought that was put into it, then the rest of the program kind of like writes itself. And also, this is, yeah, a plug for the Mid-America PTTC. So you can come in and say, hey, I've got questions. Like, should, we go this route or that route? This is some of you know, the complications that we're running up against. And just check in and see if there are resources available or if just talking about it out loud would benefit your own process. All right. Finally, moving on to, I guess I'll pause before we move into this last section. Any questions or reflections so far? No. Okay. Awesome. Well, moving to this last part, this is where Google Scholar was definitely my friend, but we can look at some of the specifics on substance use across the seasons and that prevention messaging. So again, from a high level perspective, these are some of the kind of background pieces I use to inform uh, this presentation and how I've informed past work in general. But in some ways, people are predictable creatures. We are whole beings with many roles we carry at once, whether this is family member, professional, romantic partner, friend, athlete, like whatever. But these personal events matter and they can shift, our own capacity for work at different times, as well as shifting kind of the energy and the momentum of that local area. This positioning also matters. So, collaborating or attending events with someone already doing this work. So, if you are in a recovery center, maybe you partner with a local emergency department. Or if you are in a prevention setting, maybe you are partnering with schools and, even like another town nearby that is doing similar work. It also can be beneficial to pair, yeah, your audience age with your messaging, as we just talked about. And then lastly, have fun and be creative. Okay, so you all should have received a handout sheet when you registered. Is that correct that you received that?
That's on me. I did not send people a handout. Sorry.
That is okay. That's all good. I will, it's all good. I have it up and yeah, we can share it after the training, so no worries at all. But this handout sheet, just kind of to orient you all to it, it's comprised of three parts. So the first part is somebody's dog ate it. So the first part is academics, rural and personal event, federal holidays, and then temporal or weather patterns. Part two is looking at specific substance use across different months. And then part three is messaging opportunities. And I will share that the messaging opportunities in some ways are intentionally vague because you all are the experts of your communities and your needs much more than I am. So this can kind of be an intro for you to then launch it into your own communities. So let me stop sharing and I'll pull up the sheet. All right. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I started with summer as that's the, kind of time of year that we're in now, and then we'll kind of work through the calendar year. Um, this is a good question, Chelsea. I'll dive into this now. So yeah, the current administration is looking at getting rid of the whole daylight savings time. Do you think this will affect mental health addiction prevention work? As I was preparing for this workshop, there is some early research coming out that uh, does predict, like either looking at like Phoenix and areas where they don't have daylight saving times. They were looking at how that shifted like emergency room visits and in like the initial years that there was not the daylight savings time and it was just like one standard time, there did actually tend to be some more emergency department visits. I didn't include that article in particular as it felt like a little outside the scope of this work. But I think, yeah, it's a great question you're asking, and it will be it'll be interesting to kind of see if it changes or not. I don't know all the ins and outs, but I would estimate there would be changes in some way. Yeah. Yes, and yeah, we will send this out after. Tyler. Okay, so just kind of running through this briefly. Again, I really encourage you to take notes throughout this. Uh, but thinking about the summertime, you know, uh, whether it's like students in university settings or even just like high school, middle school, uh, a lot of my work in here is posed more on college students, as that's been some of my primary populations I've worked with. But during this May through September timeline, students are preparing for finals, graduation, and then they're fully into their summer months. In rural settings, there are oftentimes county fairs, there's planting, harvesting, re-prepping beds, hotter temperatures, potentially longer working days, waking up earlier to beat the heat, really kind of moving with the rhythm of the sun. And then the federal holidays that are occurring during this time are Memorial Day, Juneteenth, 4th of July, and Labor Day. So I'm not going to go through all those for each time of the year, but just to kind of give you a heads up, that's what it looks like. So in particular, alcohol use tends to be uh, like there tend to be more drinking days in the summer, particularly for college students. So both the number of drinking days and the quantity of drinks on any given day does tend to be higher in the summer months compared to other months for young adults in particular. So what that means from a prevention standpoint is that it might be beneficial to have conversations around alternating drinks with alcohol, with drinks without alcohol, setting intentions to have certain days that are like, this is the day I'm choosing to, enjoy alcohol with my friends versus like, oh, these are days I'm going to choose to not drink. And really, kind of the benefit of that is because a lot of the alcohol consumption that occurs during these months is socially related, and it can sort of happen like accidentally in some qualitative studies. So, whether people are like, oh, I'll go to a backyard barbecue with a friend, for some people that might just be dinner, and for other people it might be um, alcohol with the meal. And if that is happening just more frequently than not, then it can really make people feel worn down or sluggish or just not be in alignment with their overall health. On the medical side, uh, alcohol-related hepatitis hospital admissions is generally highest in July, and this is then followed by August. So in this study done by Sohal and colleagues in 2022, one of their kind of hypotheses for this is that the heat index, so temperature plus humidity, can really put a lot of physiological heat stress on the body. Um, there can just be stress kind of on that cellular level if people are engaging in alcohol, not drinking water enough, long hours in the sun, alcohol is affecting the sleep quality that they're receiving. And it can just, kind of wear everything down at once. So something to kind of be aware of as well. For cannabis use, there was a national study using the National Survey of Drug Use and Health that suggests that summer is the most frequent time of year for initiation for cannabis, both for adolescents and college students. And kind of comparing that to with other substances, uh, roughly 1/3 of adolescents and college students were initiating cannabis use in the summer months. So that's fairly significant. And some of that can even just be, again, in tandem with the academic year. Maybe there's more free time available for college students, or, as adolescents are like, last summer at home before college, there might be some experimentation that is happening. And again, if that is happening, we can really then use that information to encourage like delaying use, maybe talking about like brain health and cannabis use, or even talking about, like the influence of peer pressure, even values work. Like, what do you, want your next couple months to look like as an adolescent? Like, is doing this thing that your parents would, probably not be very happy with, and that maybe you yourself are anxious about. Does that align with, like the activities that you engage in or things that you want to do kind of in your free time, whether it's like sports or creative hobbies? Um, and one other kind of caveat to this is that it didn't really matter if young adults were college students or non-college age peers. Summer was still kind of that peak time of initiating use. Looking at opioid use in the summer months, again, going back to that daily temperature, it is the most frequent time of the year for emergency department visits. There was a study out of California from Chang and colleagues in 2023 that looked at overdose associated with opioid use, amphetamine use, and cocaine use, and all three were peaked in the summer months. And there are also going to be complications with prolonged opioid use and higher temperatures. So, again, one kind of third variable or third factor within that is for people who are experiencing poverty or are in transitional housing situations, they might not have adequate access to air conditioning. So, oftentimes, places like libraries or pools or community facing centers could again be another uh, kind of natural pairing for the work that you do and kind of a natural physical place that people are maybe going to then access air conditioning and prevent themselves from overheating. And good question, Cassandra. She asked, as compared to cannabis use per the study, did you say alcohol misuse also increased among youth during the summer? So in terms of time of like initiating alcohol use, that didn't tend to happen as much in the summer months, but there was an increase in general alcohol use. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I appreciate that follow-up. I was just really curious if all, and it sounds like you did say there is a level of increase among all of them, but there is definitely much more of cannabis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay. All right.
yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, of course. All right. So moving on to fall, we will be in the fall months before we know it. So this can be a time of uh, students going back to school, homecoming events. It's also the majority of the academic semester. In a rural sense, it can be final harvests, first frosts, maybe grant applications for the following year or like preparing for those. For federal holidays, yeah, there's the ones listed there. And then temporally or with weather patterns, sunlight hours are beginning to decrease, cooler temperatures are happening. There might be a sense of like awe or like mo general, excitement for the outdoor world as people are kind of watching the leaves change. I don't know about you all, but I feel like fall is definitely the time of year that people like talk about the weather the most because there's just kind of that like finiteness to it, which is something that I really enjoy. Um, and again, looking at alcohol use in the fall months. So for college students, this is the highest time for risky alcohol use and dating violence victimization. So sometimes those two are paired together, sometimes they're not. In particular, for freshmen or first year students, as well as transfer students, uh, there can be um, high risk for binge drinking or drinking in like high amounts of alcohol. So like over 4 or 5 drinks in over the course of 2 hours. And yeah, this kind of period in August can just spike with like everyone's back on campus. Um, there are oftentimes people who are underage that are drinking that maybe aren't aware of like what their body can tolerate in terms of amount. And yeah, just some like not great experiences that can happen during that time. So again, pairing this with different messaging opportunities, um, talking about like safe partying habits, alternating drinks, intentional drinking days, health complications, even pairing it with academics and giving some kind of like motivational interviewing around like, what do you want this semester to look like? And uh, yeah, encouraging like holistic care again without like villainizing alcohol as like all good or bad. But then interestingly, September is historically a low for federal alcohol sales. So there's a little dip that happens where people don't drink alcohol as much. And then come October through December, it spikes back up again. So just as I shared within um, summer months, there's maybe more drinking days that happen. October through December can be higher amounts on any given night, whether it's due to like holidays that are happening, um, or like university events like homecoming, football games, things of that nature. And yeah, there was a study back from 2016. However, I believe it still stands like fairly consistent today, where college students experience a 31% increase in alcohol consumption on school return. So from early October to early November, um, yeah, it can just be an increase. Moving on to cannabis use in the fall months. Again, there's not much of a shift in the summer. And then honestly, in the fall, there was a little bit of an increase, like roughly 13%. But this really was an area I didn't find much research on. And it seems to be kind of like a steady period where people who have never used cannabis before don't tend to initiate use. There's not an increase or decrease in using cannabis for people who already are using it. It's just kind of steady. There is that little increase, but it then kind of drops down again. And then again, moving on to opioid use in the fall months, September was the second most utilized month for emergency services for people experiencing opioid-related incidents. And again, this is behind July. So this was a newer study from Zhang and colleagues in 2025. So the months that we talked about for opioid related complications in hospitals so far are July, August, and September. So again, those kind of hotter months can really spike risks. And this is a time as well where I kind of like to think about like backtracking a little bit. So if we know that July, August, September can be a busier time of year for like emergency departments and for our friends who are in recovery or treatment centers, we can then backtrack to like February and kind of think about like, okay, we know that this will be a peak coming up. Are there things that we can do right now or things that we can write into our next grant application that can then support um, this thing that we know will happen? So whether that's anything as small as like placing brochures in waiting rooms or fact sheets or something more integrated, such as, sorry, my cat's feeder. Something more integrated, such as, like placing sort of like a community-based partner that comes to the hospital, once a month and does like a 2 hour training for nurses and emergency department personnels. So yeah, thanks, Jennifer. They're cutie pies. All right. Um, Moving on, we've got about 9 minutes left, and then we'll move into our Q&A. Going into the winter months, again, this is like roughly December through March. So it is the majority of the academic winter break, beginning of spring semester. We're approaching spring break for college students and high school students. It's also winter holidays, start of the new year, New Year's resolutions, um, spring and greenhouse planting, prepping harvest beds, and the Super Bowl. And then, yeah, the list of federal holidays and the temporal patterns are listed below. But as we mentioned in the last slide, there's a little bit of overlap here. But this December time is when some like peak episodic drinking can happen. Um, And a lot of that is hypothesized to be with winter holidays and the academic calendar. However, there is some research that says no, this is actually a slower time of year for people with alcohol use. So, again, I would verify some of that information with your community and your population. So, again, this is one area that it's like it can depend. Uh, Again, for messaging opportunities, I think this is a great spot to promote free community events or holiday markets. Maybe it's an opportunity for your organization to table at such markets, even partner with like local artists as necessary. Um, yeah, and just uh, kind of again create that like holistic community feel. For cannabis in the winter months, uh, this is the biggest drop off that we see. In terms of actual like growing and harvesting cannabis, the winter months tend to have a lower yield. And there was some reports from cannabis producers that hypothesize people may prefer to consume cannabis outdoors, which is maybe one reason that cannabis use goes down during this time, if it's colder outside. Also with New Year's resolutions. Uh, Again, there's just like social and environmental factors that can be at play. And then again, for messaging opportunities, we can prepare for spring, which is another seasonal uptick in cannabis use. I also added a couple additional resources here. So some of these are just to have um, like kind of see what other organizations are doing to create community-facing messaging. The Minnesota Department of Health is actually like just building resources around cannabis use prevention. So while they're not a part of the Region 7, might be even some opportunities to partner with somebody in the Midwest and kind of hear like what they're doing to problem solve in their area and see if there's lessons that you can adapt to then your area. I also included this conversation guide for parents and families from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I think it's a pretty comprehensive resource to go through, yeah, like what topics that might come up and how to do so in a way that encourages continued conversation. And then again, for opioid use in the winter months, there really was like no research I could find in this area. I'm sure there is some out there, and if you all become aware of anything, I would really welcome you sending that my way. But in general, based on the other times of year, this seems to be a time of year where opioid use is just kind of steady. Like there's no increase or decrease, it's just occurring. And then finally, for the spring months, which is March through June, this is when, spring break happens, second half of the semester, finals, and we're back to graduation. So this can be a time where high school seniors might initiate first time use. Uh, and yeah, tapping into those like future goals, future value or current values and future values, and potentially beginning conversations with local hospitals. And then for cannabis use, this is one that is fairly interesting to me, and again can have some of those geographic underpinnings. So there was a study done by Palmer and colleagues, and another one which is not listed here, but they looked at people who were in Midwestern institutions and saw that there was more cannabis use like the day before Lent and like for people who are identifying or like from like Irish Catholic backgrounds. And then April 20th or 420, which is sometimes considered like a cannabis use, like it's like a cannabis day, I guess. Um, that might be a day for increased use or like higher amounts of use. And then for people who were living in the South and more in like New Orleans area, Mardi Gras then tended to be a time of higher cannabis use. So again, like our environments and our peers and events that are happening in those areas do create opportunities for um, prevention as well as for engagement with those substances. So just understanding that and adapting that to uh, your little community can be really beneficial. So yes, that is all I have for you today. I have my references in the slides, and I also have my contact information there if you have any questions or concerns. But I really appreciate your engagement and time today, and yeah, I really welcome any questions that you all have.
We did have one question submitted. Are overdoses involving cannabis higher during winter because there is less supply available and people have less options from who or where to buy it from?
That is a good question. I truthfully don't know the answer to that, but I can look into that and follow up. I have in general, I have not heard really of like overdoses from cannabis itself. However, if that cannabis is, uh, has something else that the person is unintentionally taking, then of course that can lead to health complications. Right. Chelsea has a question. This is just an idea, but is there a website like Canva, but for prevention specialists to share their pamphlets, designs regarding programming? That way we can share what we are working on to help each other. That is a good question. I do not know of anything like that. And I think in general, since it can be best practice to follow like the funding agency's requirements, oftentimes like SAMHSA, like the Substance Use Mental Health Service Agency, I don't know what it fully stands for at this moment, but like SAMHSA or other funding agencies will actually provide some of those templates yourself and then can share like toolkits and um, yeah, kind of starting ground for that. Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Emma.